All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for attending this session today. We're really excited with the work and the thinking of Brad Nguyen and what he's going to take us through today. We're appreciative of you making the time for those who are joining us live at what can be a slightly witching hour at the end of a long day in the classroom. So we're thankful that you've put aside time and value your learning, particularly around visualizers and mini whiteboards. So we're pretty excited to bring this session to you today on behalf of Ochre Education. We're excited also to be partnering alongside Modern Teaching Aids, which is an Australian company who's been working with schools and supporting schools for decades in Australia to bring you this presentation today. I'm really excited to introduce Brad. Brad is a learning leader in a school here in metropolitan Melbourne at Docklands Primary School. He has a great knowledge and expertise in a range of different areas, having taught for a number of years in different year levels in primary. And he also supports schools and systems with a variety of different work as an educational consultant. And we're really excited to be able to offer some of his skill set here to you today. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Brad. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Reed. And thank you everyone for coming. I'm hoping today is going to be a really practical, useful session. In this session, there's going to be lots of opportunities for you to sort of share your ideas in the chat. So please do share, don't be shy. And I'll be able to respond to a few comments and questions as they turn up in the chat. I'm just going to start sharing my slides as well that I prepared. One second. Here we are. Okay, so continue to share. Okay, everyone can see this okay? Awesome, lovely. Okay, so let's get started. So I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm presenting from Wurundjeri land and I pay respect to Aboriginal elders past and present. Um, a little bit about myself as well. Part of my story is that I was there at the start of Think Forward Educators, which is a grassroots group of educators and people in allied health and in the educational research sector who are all interested in improving educational outcomes. Uh, Fun fact, if you have a look at that icon for Think Forward Educators, I designed that. So that's a fun factoid for you. Another part of my story is in 2021, Docklands Primary School opened. And the vision for Docklands Primary School was to deliver a knowledge-rich curriculum and use evidence-based practice, including the science of reading and the science of learning. And I was very lucky to be there at the very start and to be able to build the school from the ground up, along with a fantastic team of educators. And I've been able to learn so much there. Uh, More recently, I've worked for the Victorian Department of Education, which has been doing some great work in sort of increasing a focus on explicit instruction. And I've been able to work with them on their Victorian lesson plans, particularly the maths ones. And then more recently, as Reed said, I've been helping schools and systems as a consultant. So if you want to work with me, go to bradnewen.com. There'll be a link at the end of the session. So this is the school that I work at. It's a pretty lovely school in the Docklands, which people are very surprised to sort of learn that there is a school there. It doesn't seem like there might be a school there, but there is a school there. It's sort of over 600 students there now, so it's quite large. Um, but so one of the best investments we did from the very start of the opening the school was that we got document cameras for every single classroom. So it's a huge part of our school. And it's been great to see that look, there's been an increased interest in document cameras and visualizers. I know that the Tasmanian government actually has started buying visualizers for schools as well. So that's been a really nice development too. So it's great to see that there's an increased emphasis on explicit instruction, but also more support from systems as well to help teachers. So the big thing at the moment, right, is to make sure that we're using evidence-based instruction. And what does that mean? It means that when we're teaching new content or new skills and knowledge to students, that we're really using explicit instruction, and we'll also make sure that students are not getting overwhelmed. And so we need to manage their cognitive load. So that's going to inform the way that we teach, right? Chunking information, making sure students practice. And then the other sort of really important part of evidence-based instruction is make sure that the teacher is structuring practice. So it's not enough to just hear information from the teacher, but the students actually need to be doing a lot of work, right? So lots of teachers all around Australia are putting lots of effort into all these sorts of things. They're trying to make sure they're improving their skills in explicit instruction, really working hard to manage cognitive load, really working hard to make sure that they're structuring practice for their students. So the question is technology going to help us with that? Or is technology going to be a distraction? So it's something really worth considering, right? Because we're putting so much effort into making education better. Is technology actually going to help us with that? So there's actually a little bit of data that can help us to think about this. So I'm showing you here some data. This is from PISA. And the great thing about PISA is that in addition to doing the regular sort of assessment of students learning through test items, they also do some surveys to ask students about their learning environment. And so they can learn about what sort of technology is being used at students' schools, who's using it, and so forth. And from here, you can see that what sort of technology has a particular impact on reading skills, math skills, science knowledge as well. And interestingly, the type of technology which helps is things like a data projector, which means anything which like puts information on a big screen, right? So you can think about TVs, you can think about projectors, anything like that. Second thing is an internet connected computer is going to be really, really helpful. If the computer doesn't have the internet, it's less helpful. And tablets, which we know that schools spend a lot of money on tablets. I mean, my school has tablets too, but actually they don't necessarily have a great impact on learning. So it's not to say that you shouldn't have tablets at your school, but you should be mindful that it may not have the impact on learning that you think it will. So not only is the type of technology important, but who uses the technology is also important. So let's have a look at this data here. So this is looking at impact on learning depending on who is using technology. So is the student only the person using the technology? The teacher and student both using technology, or is just the teacher? So, intuitively, lots of people might think that, oh, it's the student who needs to be using the technology in order to improve the outcomes. But actually, what the data is saying here is that it's the teacher's use of technology which is having the impact on outcomes, which is a really, really interesting outcome. What does all this mean, right? It doesn't mean that your students shouldn't use technology. It's just that actually technology that supports the teacher-led instruction is the type of technology use that's going to have a positive impact on student outcomes. And that is why we're talking about visualizers today, because that is the technology that supports teacher instruction. So here's a basic visualizer. I'm very curious. Lots of people here today. I want to know, what is your experience using a visualizer in the classroom? Please share in the chat. It might be something like, I've never used a visualizer in my life. What is a visualizer? It might be that you have particular experience using it in a particular context. Yeah, really keen to hear what your experiences are. It's kind of hard for because I'm sharing the screen at the moment. I can't see the chat, but Trish, my good friend from Ochre, is going to be looking at the chat and sharing some choice comments and questions from the chat.
You can see Jackie said we've started using them last term. We are modeling on Doug Lemov's show call.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, we'll be talking about that in a moment, but show call meaning that you're highlighting student work.
I use an iPad linked to my interactive whiteboard, a bit dodgy, but it works.
Great. We don't always have ideal teaching situations. We often have to sort of like jerry rig some sort of ideal situation for ourselves. So totally empathize with that.
No experience, Deborah, no experience with the visualizer, but have used a computer connected microscope. Very cool.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, love that.
We've got Karen, relief teacher from SA, maths and science subjects I carry in my bag and use it daily.
Ah, okay. We got a diehard visualizer fan. Yep. Okay, great. Okay, thanks for sharing all of that. So, we've got a few varying experiences with visualizers in the group today. For the rest of this session, this is sort of what the outline looks like. So, I'm going to talk about how they help teachers, and then we're going to look at the basic setup. So, how to set up your classroom. Uh, Third thing is to look at how to plan for their use. So, if you are going to use visualizers, then you also want to plan for their use, especially if you're planning for your colleagues. And then finally, we're going to look at some considerations for purchasing. So, there are a few people here who have never used one. Maybe you're looking to buy one. Maybe you're a school leader who's looking to buy one for your school. So, that's going to be helpful for you as well. Okay, let's have a look at this first section, how they help teachers. So, uh, in summary, here's how they help teachers. One, they help with read alouds. They help with explaining and modeling. Next point, they help with guiding practice. So that's where the teacher and the students are all together working on problems together. It helps with sharing student work, and we heard someone mention show call from Teach Like a Champion, so we'll be talking about that. And it just generally helps with making anything bigger, such a helpful tool in the classroom, even when you're not planning to use it. Okay, so let's look at read alouds first. Okay, so there's probably going to be a lot of primary school teachers here, but even if you're a secondary teacher, reading aloud to students is one of the most joyful things you can do, right? So here's a picture of someone reading to a bunch of kids. These kids are happy. It's something which should happen in every classroom every day, right? However, often the kids who are happiest are the kids at the front, right? So if you think about the kids at the back, they are not necessarily having the same experience as the kids at the front because they can't see the picture as easily, right? And you lots of people have had experience of reading to a bunch of kids, and you get disrupted by a student who raises their hand saying, "I can't see the picture," and so you have to like show the picture, you move the book to them, and then someone from the other side, "I can't see the picture either," and it can be very, very trying, right? And so a visualizer is going to help with that. So here's a picture of myself. This is me in 2021, actually. I'm teaching a phonics lesson to some prep kids, and we're reading a decodable reader. You can see that it's not a very advanced book. The title is Sit, right? But it's not a giant book, right? So it's really important for the students to be able to see the book, be able to see the words, and you can see that the kids are on the floor. Everyone can see the book really easily. Even the kids at the back of the room would be able to see the book really easily. You can imagine if I had the actual book in my hands, you would not be able to read it, right? But very, very easy to read now. So I've shown you sort of like an image of myself teaching with a physical book underneath a document camera. I'm very curious as to what you're thinking about. Well, can we just use digital books instead? So I want you to think about what are some potential drawbacks of using digital books instead of physical books. So yeah, have a think about what that might be and share in the chat. Would be really eager to share some of your thoughts.
We got Narina, death by screens, lack of control over what I am sharing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you have less control. And I think there's a number of reasons why you have less control when you're using a digital book. One is that you're constrained in the titles that you're using, right? You're dependent on a digital library, which has a limited selection, right? But if you've got a visualizer, you can turn any book into, an experience for the whole class. Any size book, you just stick it under the visualizer, and then suddenly you can reach the whole class and everyone can enjoy it. So that's one of the reasons why you have more control. Another reason you have more control is your ability to just like zoom in, zoom out, turn the page. It's just a lot more intuitive to do that with a visualizer than it is to do with a digital book. Especially, right? Sometimes the way we try to digitize books is we take photos and then we put it into a slideshow, right? And so we've got a slideshow of a book, but you can't zoom into the slides the way that you can zoom in when you're using a visualizer. So yeah, that's another way that you can lose control.
We've got a few people saying, yeah, concepts about print aren't so clear, directionality. Um,
100%. Yeah, that point about concepts of print is so important, Even things like turning the page, right? A book is a number of pages which have to be turned, right? Or a skill such as like tracking the text. So when I was, sorry, I can switch back. See here, you can see that not only can I see the book, but I can see how I'm tracking the text with my finger, and I'm using my finger to draw attention to different aspects of the book. Harder to do with the digital book, yeah, for sure.
I noticed that students don't engage with physical books during library time.
Yeah, right. Okay. So, I think there's nothing better than the physical book. And there's been a lot of sort of research recently about how kids read more deeply when they're reading physical books, right? So I think we really need to make a case for using physical books in the classroom. And interestingly, one of the ways that we can save physical books is using the technology of a visualizer. Great. Okay, thank you for sharing those thoughts. So I really like the point about the sort of concepts of print, because often it's not just that we need students to be able to see the words, but we need to teach them how books work as well. Here's a really great image of a colleague of mine, Dan Oliver. He's teaching a group of, I think, grade 5, maybe. He's reading a book with them. I think it's The Giver. And they're reading this as a class novel. So the students have the novel in front of them on their desks, and then he's also teaching the kids how to track the text. So you can see that he's actually using a ruler to keep track of which line he's reading, and that's going to help the students to sort of realize, oh yes, I need to be tracking the text too, right? And especially if you've got kids with, attentional issues, then teaching the kids explicitly how to track text can be really, really helpful. So the big idea here is that visualizers, they help teachers model the process of reading physical books to a class of children. So it's not just about being able to see the words and see the pictures. It's also about modeling the process of reading a physical book. So a really, really important thing. Okay, so next thing is looking at explaining and modeling. We just talked about read aloud, so let's look at explaining and modeling. So one of the problems when you're teaching something explicitly, you're showing students something and you want them to learn from what you're doing, is that students can find it difficult to learn from the teacher's model when the teacher is using different materials than what the students are using. I'm going to give you an example. So let's just say you're making a mind map with the students. You want the students to make a mind map. You're going to model for them, and they're going to copy from your model. You say, we're going to make a mind map. Write the topic insects. We learn about insects. So write insects in the middle of your page. And the students have a page in front of them, and they write insects, but they write it like this. It's way too big. You want to write some details around the outside. There's no space to do that. And now they've written it, they've ruined the page, right? And you're gonna have to like spend some time. No, not that big, it's smaller. And you add a few more, you add a few more instructions, and you waste a lot of time. Okay. Really common problem. Uh, if you use a document camera, you can use the same materials that the students are using. So you say, we're going to make a mind map, write the topic insects in the middle of your page like this, and you show them the same page that they have in front of them, and you write insects. And if you show them how to write insects on their page, you're actually giving them a lot more information. You're showing how big they should write insects relative to the contours of the page. So without adding a lot more instruction, you're actually giving them a lot more information about what to do. Another thing that we want to model with often in the classrooms is using concrete materials in maths, such as these MAB blocks. Now, there are problems when you're trying to explain with concrete materials to a group of students, right? And remember, we're talking about a group of 20 to 30 kids. There's got kids at the front, but there's got lots of kids at the back. So what are some problems that you might encounter? It might be that your materials are too small. So you're showing kids how to make, 246, and the kids at the front can see it with your materials, but the kids at the back can't see it. So the fact that your materials are too small is a problem. One of the solutions is you have like special teacher materials. So you have giant MAB blocks that you stick on the board, right? But these can cause problems as well. So one of the problems by these like special teacher materials that are oversized, one is that they're just too different from the student materials. So if the teacher's materials are like blue and red, and the student's materials are just wood, they may struggle to make a connection between the materials you're using on the board and the materials that they have in front of them, right? So often the teacher materials are just unhelpfully different from what the students have in front of them. Another thing is that these teacher materials, they're too expensive, right? And schools have to make choices about what they spend money on. And it may be that the oversized teacher materials are too expensive. Sometimes these oversized materials that we would love to have just don't exist. So, if I had the money, I would buy it, but they just don't sell it. So, yeah, that's a problem too. Sometimes I think, well, if the materials are too small, why don't I just like have slides with the materials? I think slides are not an alternative for using concrete materials, for a number of reasons. And I think one of the reasons is that slides are directly showing you certain concepts, like taken away, right? So when you take away a material, you're actually grabbing it and you're moving it somewhere else. But often when you take something away, it just disappears, which is a different concept, right? Or when you're putting things together, you might be able to solve some of these problems with really clever animation, but we're not all wired to be wizards at animation in PowerPoint. So I think that it's just so much easier to just use concrete materials to directly represent concepts such as putting together, taken away. So here's what it can look like in the classroom. So this is me explaining a maths concept using concrete materials. So this is a subtraction lesson. They're subtracting 23 from 57. And you can see that I've put 57 up on the board using concrete materials. And the students have the exact same concrete material, so they can look up at the TV, they can see what I've done, and they can do the exact same thing in front of them on their desk. It's in other areas of maths can be really useful. So this is my colleague Linda. She's doing a lesson on 3D objects. She's modeling how to make a cube with a focus on the vertices and the edges as well. You can see that she's modeling on the TV. The students can see the model on the TV and they can copy with her, so they're making that on their desk as well. So again, the big idea here is that the students are using the same materials as the teacher. And then here's an example of using a whiteboard, right? So the teacher's using a whiteboard, the students have the same whiteboard, and so the students are able to sort of copy what the teacher is doing. Here, this is a lesson on writing a a concluding sentence, I believe. And here's another example. This is a writing lesson. This is an editing lesson. So my colleague Beth here is showing the students how to revise and edit, right? So she's using a worksheet, and it's the exact same worksheet that the students all have in front of them. So it's easy for them to learn from the teacher's model. So the big idea here is that using the same materials as students, it makes it easier for students to connect what the teacher is doing to what they are being asked to do. And I don't think this can, this might seem obvious, but I think it's not possible to overstate this, that it's so much easier when the teacher is using the same materials as the students. Okay, so I've just shown you like heaps of photos and discussed lots of different areas where you can use a visualizer. Personally, in your own context, what are some ways that you can see visualizers being useful for you? We've probably got people teaching different year levels, different subjects. Would really love to hear some ideas from you.
Okay. Handwriting. We've got modeling whiteboard use, showing how to calculate maths problems.
100%. Yeah, so some really, really good ideas there. So yeah, handwriting. Handwriting is really important. So often we try and teach handwriting on those those giant dotted thirds on the whiteboard, but they're so slightly different to what the students have in front of them. So if you can actually have the same piece of paper that the students have and you model on that piece of paper, it might make it a lot easier as well.
I love this one,
Um,
Deborah. Art techniques.
Love that. So that's a different subject. So yeah, absolutely useful for art. So the teacher can sort of model an art technique, and then the students can copy from the teacher's model. I love that.
We've got explaining independent activities or games before breaking off.
Yes, for sure. Yes. So, if you're playing a game, it can be hard to explain the game. Often when people try to explain games, they like just try to just say what the rules are, but the rules by themselves are really hard to understand. So what you want to do is you actually want to show them the game. So you put the game underneath the document camera, you show them how it works, and the students are, okay, I get it. Lovely. Okay, so thank you so much for sharing your ideas. I can see that there's lots of excitement for using visualizers. And I think this is one of those no-brainers, right? It's like lots of schools are wringing their hands around, should I buy this? Should I buy that? But I think when it comes to visualizers, it's one of those like no-brainers. If you buy it, it's going to be helpful. Teachers are going to immediately see that's useful. Okay, so we were talking about how they help teachers with read alouds and explaining and modeling. We're going to look at guiding practice just briefly. Someone previously was talking about how they can help with handwriting, which I totally agree with. So here's a picture of a student doing some handwriting practice. You can see they've got a handwriting book in front of them. And you probably don't want to just say, just fill out the page, because actually how the students interact with the page is really important, right? We want them to start from the correct position. We want them to carefully, do their writing. Maybe you want them to check and correct. So it's very, very important that students aren't just filling out the page, but they're actually interacting with the page in a productive way. And so that's why the teacher may want to model first and then get the students to do it afterwards, right? So the teacher saying, make sure you start here. I'm going to follow the dotted lines like this. And they're showing underneath the visualizer, and the students follow along. But I think there's just something to be cautious about here when you're guiding student practice with something like this, is that another important part of our practice needs to be checking for understanding and checking what the students are doing, monitoring that they're working productively. So that is my caution. So when guiding practice with a document camera, don't forget to check what the students are doing. So if you're at the document camera saying, make sure you start here and you follow the dotted lines like here. Okay, everyone's doing that, right? And like the kids are nodding and it looks like they're productive. And then you actually look at a student's work carefully and actually they're working from the opposite end and they're going backwards and so that can happen. So my advice here is don't get stuck at the visualizer. Make sure that you do use the visualizer, but you also check what students are actually doing when they're practicing. Okay, we were just talking about guided practice. Another area where visualizers can be really helpful is with sharing student work. So I'm going to show you sort of like a scenario here. This is from Teach Like a Champion by Doug Lemov. So let's just say it's a writing lesson and the teacher wants to highlight Martina's work. And they say, hey, Martina, can you share your work with the class? And Martina reads her answer aloud. And the teacher says, let's give Martina some feedback. What was effective about her answer? So the teacher's like wants the students to learn from interacting with Martina's writing. So a student responds and said, she had really good details. And that's not a bad start, right? But it's probably not detailed enough. We want to get a little bit more from the student. So the teacher says, good. What was good about her details? And then what do you think the student's going to say? I don't remember exactly. I just remember they were really good. Now, it's lovely that the student's giving some positive feedback to Martina about her work, but this specific feedback is not very useful, right? And the reason it's not useful is because the student doesn't have access to Martina's writing, right? It's very hard to remember lots of words that are just said verbally, right? We need to see it written down. And again, this is where visualizers can help us. So here is an example of sharing student work. So this is my colleague Holly. She's doing a writing lesson and they're coming up with some ideas for a persuasive paragraph. And she's chosen a student's work to show on underneath the visualizer. And then they're going to get some feedback on their ideas for their paragraph before they start writing. So they're revising the plan, as you were. You can see that you're not going to encounter this problem. It's like, what do you think specifically is good about this plan? The student can see the plan and it's going to help them to give them some feedback. If the student had simply said this out loud without showing it to the class, then the students wouldn't be able to give feedback, right? So being able to use a visualizer to share student work is a really, really powerful thing. So the big idea here is that document cameras, they help teachers share and celebrate student work and to elicit feedback from peers. Okay, so we just talked about sharing student work. My final point for how visualizers help teachers is just making anything bigger. And here I'm talking about just like off the cuff moments where you're sort of caught by, circumstances and you just want to make something bigger. Sometimes a student might come in and say, "Oh, I brought in a leaf. I found this interesting leaf during playtime. I want to show people," right? And the teacher lets the student show their leaf and no one can see the leaf. It's going to be really boring for the rest of the class, right? But if everyone can see the leaf, maybe, just maybe, everyone's going to find that leaf really fascinating. So I'm going to just show you an example here. This is one of my students sharing a poster after the class has been learning about different rocks and minerals. And they went home and they were like, oh, do you know what? I've got a poster about rocks and minerals. And they brought it in, which is really lovely thing to do. But you can imagine if the class couldn't really see the poster, they can't see the details, it wouldn't be very interesting for them. But the fact that it's visible means that everyone's more likely to be interested in what their peer is saying, which means it's more likely to be like a strong, positive cultural experience for everyone involved. So, good thing about document cameras and visualizers that I think that can help you to stop with some workload issues, and then you can start doing other things. So this slide is just about thinking about things that you can stop doing if you have a visualizer. So one of the things you can stop doing and save yourself some time, you can stop digitizing books. Man, like the work of like taking a photo of every single page or scanning it in. I mean, like the legality of it notwithstanding, it takes time, right? And so you don't have to do that anymore. Just put a book underneath the camera. Easy. So instead of digitizing books, just grab real books, put them underneath the document camera. Super easy. Okay. Another thing you can stop doing is looking for butcher's paper. So, you know, a big part of teaching is like creating like anchor charts and creating mind maps and Venn diagrams and all that sort of thing. And we usually need like a large piece of butcher's paper to do that. And then like we run out of butcher's papers, like where's the butcher's paper? And you spend your break walking around the school saying, who's got butcher's paper? No one's got butcher's paper. This is really hard. Okay, then you have to like make sure that your team leader is ordering some butcher's paper. It's a waste of time. You don't have to do that if you've got a visualizer, right? Instead of looking for butcher's paper, you just stick an A4 piece of paper underneath the document camera. And then you do the same thing you would normally, but you just do it on an A4 piece of paper with a pen. Same outcome. You don't need oversized paper. Much easier. Okay. Another thing you can stop doing, you can stop buying oversized displays. So, you know, sort of things that we expect to see in the classroom, like hundreds charts that are like 1 meter by 1 meter, dotted thirds again, like, you know, 1 meter by 2 meters. I don't know. They're really large displays, and they're sort of like part of the vocabulary of classrooms. You actually don't need to do that, right? So instead, you grab a regular sized version of those things, and when you need them, you just put it underneath the document camera. I think this sort of speaks to the fact that a lot of us have realized that actually having too much on display in a classroom can be unhelpful, right? So one way that we can sort of reduce clutter is just by taking out displays when we need them. But if all those displays are like 1 meter by 2 meters, it's a really hard thing to manage. If they're just like an A4 piece of paper that you pull out and put underneath the visualizer, that's much more manageable. Okay, so we've talked about how visualizers are going to be useful for people. In this next section, we're going to talk about how to set up your camera or your visualizer in your classroom so it's actually quite useful. Here's a typical classroom. You can see that this is the front. At the front, that is where you should put the document camera. So over here on the teacher's desk. And the reason for putting it at the front is so that you can do your work underneath the document camera, and then you can quickly glance up, and then you can see your students as well. So you not only are you doing something underneath the camera, but you also need to sort of glance up and be able to see what your students are doing. Because not only are the students interacting with the screen, they're interacting with you as a physical person. So they sort of like need to sort of see you physically as well. And you need to be able to see them as well. Okay, so often people put their document camera at the back. I think the idea there is that they want people to focus on just what's on the screen. So what's on the screen would be sort of on the left. But I think that again, they're unable to see what their students are doing from the back of the room. They're unable to see their students' faces, and the students aren't able to see them. So their physical impact is lessened as well. Sometimes people sort of put their visualizer on the side of the classroom. Again, I think there's probably some reasoning behind it, but I think the simple fact of it is that the students need to see you, and you need to be able to see the students as well, in addition to using the visualizer. So big thing, put it at the front, don't put it at the back. Next point with your basic setup is that you need to put it on an adequate table. And so, this is not necessarily perfect, but I think why this table is adequate is that there's some bare space underneath it, right? Often we have teacher tables that are just sort of like junk spaces, right? When we have a bunch of tests that we need to mark and we don't have time to do it right now, we put it on the table, right? And the more you put on the table, the less space you have to actually teach. So I think maybe the alternative here is like you have your junk table, if that's the sort of person you are, you have your junk table, but you need to teach on a clean table. So you need to keep a table like this that is like free of clutter. If you're like a person with a lot of clutter, just put the clutter elsewhere, but you need to have an adequate table here. The other thing I think is that it can be very fashionable for classrooms to do away with teacher tables completely. And I think that's wrong-headed. I think as we're discovering that an active teacher playing a role in explicit instruction is important, and they need a space to teach on as well. So I think having a teach table is part and parcel of explicit instruction. So here's a non-example. This is a great non-example, and you can see what I'm talking about here. You can see there's a visualizer there, but there's all these chords and things on the table. So when that gets shown on TV, the students are seeing all these messy chords. They wouldn't be able to put like concrete materials there because it'd be all these things in the way. So yeah, make sure you have a nice clean table. Okay. So we know how to set up our visualizer. We need to make sure that they're used. So let's talk about how to plan for their use. If you don't plan to use them, this is what can happen. So if you don't carefully plan to use visualizers, they may just end up gathering dust. Spend money on them and they just sit in the back of the room and you don't do anything with them. Okay, the other thing that can happen is that you can sort of have a situation where you have death by PowerPoint. So PowerPoints are great. I love them. We use them all the time at my school, but you don't want every single aspect of instruction to be on a PowerPoint, right? So that would be a bad outcome. So for example, if you're doing a writing lesson, you want to physically live model the act of writing. If you're doing a maths lesson, you want to physically use concrete manipulatives live. So that has to be an essential part of teaching in addition to PowerPoints if that's what your school does. Here's my solution to that. So I think that teacher-facing slides are a great cue for teachers to use live modeling. So if you look at this picture that I've created here, so we've got a teacher doing something on the board, they're live modeling on the whiteboard, right? But to help them, they're actually looking at slides that are not for the students, they're for the teacher. So the teacher is looking at the slides, but supporting them to live model on the whiteboard. And I've highlighted the icon there because the icon there, that comes from the Ochre slides, right? So in some of the Ochre slides, they have this icon which says, this is a slide with concrete materials, right? So I think you need to build a culture where if you see that icon that says, when you use concrete materials, that is a cue for teachers to actually stop using those slides, but use those slides to help the teacher with their live modeling. So that is a good habit to start. Okay. So here's an example from an Ochre slide. So we're making bundles of 10 with 30 pop sticks. So to make 30, how many bundles do we need to make 30? We need 3 bundles. So let's count by 10, 10, 20, 30. And you see there's some great pictures of sort of bundling sticks here. But you can also see in the top right corner, it's got that icon that I showed you before, and it says that these are concrete materials. So this is a good example of where, do you know what? How about we turn off the slides, but we're going to use this slide to support the teachers in using concrete materials in a useful way, right? And if all the teachers are seeing the same slide, then you can sort of imagine that there's greater consistency across different classrooms in using those concrete materials as well. Okay, so you saw this image before of me, right? Of me teaching maths. I'm teaching subtraction. They're subtracting 23 from 57. I've got some concrete materials there on TV. And the point I want to make about this image is that this is an image of me using slides, right? Even though you can't see any slides, and I'm just using concrete materials, you can actually see there on my desk that there's an open laptop, right? And if you could look at the screen on the laptop, it's actually slides showing the base 10 blocks that I'm using, right? So because you don't want to have to think of examples on the fly, you want to think of that in advance. So I'm looking at the slides, they're teacher facing, but it's helping me to deliver a really good lesson that involves live modeling. And there it is, the computer. Another thing that can help with making sure that teachers are actually using these slides to support them with live modeling is to use transition slides. So this is what I mean by a transition slide. So often the slides that you use are going to be student facing. So you show them a student facing slide, then you go to the next slide, student facing, maybe it's got some questions for them to answer. And then there's got a slide, and all it says is stop displaying the slides. That's the only thing which the slide does. It's impossible for the teacher to miss. And then the next slide is a teacher-facing slide. And then the teacher is continuing instruction. The students can't see the slides, just the teacher can see the slides. And the students are just paying attention to what the teacher is doing, right? So we've got a teacher-facing slide, maybe have another teaching-facing slide, and then it says display slides. And then after that, you got some more student-facing slides. Maybe there's some more questions for the students to solve, right? The reason why I think these transition slides are useful is that if you just depend on the icons are easy to miss, right? So if you want to cue your colleagues to use the teacher-facing slides without showing them to students, you want to provide a really clear cue for your colleagues, something they absolutely can't miss. So I think having just one transition slide, which is stop displaying the slides, is going to be much easier to follow for your colleagues. Okay, so here is an example of what it can look like in a lesson. So this is a lesson taken from one of my maths lessons. So we've got our learning objective. We will learn about equivalent fractions. This is a student-facing slide because we want students to see the learning objective and just say it out loud. And then we're going to have a sort of task to activate their prior knowledge. So they're going to look at these pictures and then to write the fraction that's been represented. Again, it's a student-facing slide, right? The students can see this. And then here's an example of that transition slide. There's something that this teacher cannot miss. All it says is that the students need a strip of paper, and then it says switch to document camera. So you can imagine if one of your colleagues sees the slides, they sort of can't ignore that, right? It just says switch to document camera. Okay, I'm going to switch to document camera. Okay, and then you have a teacher-facing slide, and so that's what that icon there in the top right corner is. It's supposed to be a visualizer. It's actually a data projector or an overhead projector from back in the day. But here you can sort of see that it's got a script on the left-hand side. So this is sort of telling the teacher what to say and what to ask. And then you've got pictures there, which are sort of like telling the teacher what to do with the piece of paper as well. Right? So this is not useful for the students to see. The students don't need to see the script, but the script is very helpful for teachers. Right? So the teacher is just going to show students how to fold a piece of paper in half to show equivalent fractions underneath the visualizer. It can be much easier. So one of the problems was death by PowerPoint, but to that I say fight fire with fire. So if there are too many slides being used in your school, well, to combat that, you use slides to support teachers who rely too heavily on slides. Okay, so finally, we're going to look at some considerations for purchasing. This is sort of like the range for visualizer. You've got a lower range of $125, sometimes cheaper. Your mid-range visualizer is around $400, and then your higher range is $750. So it's interesting to think about the connection to your computer or to the screen from the document camera. So when you're thinking about what to buy, think about how it connects to the screen. Okay, this is one of the key considerations. So here's one way that a document camera or visualizer can connect to a screen is simply you plug it into the screen via HDMI, right? So it's a cord, a physical cord that connects the visualizer to the screen. Another way that they can connect to the screen is if you have a computer as the sort of midpoint, right? So for example, the camera can connect to your computer via USB cord, and then your computer might be wirelessly connected to the TV. Okay, so that's one way it can happen. Another thing is that maybe it's your computer that's connected to the TV via HDMI. Okay, and then there's another variation where the camera is wirelessly connected to your computer, but they're much rarer. Okay, but this sort of like shows you the variations and connections between a visualizer and a screen. Now, the reason why I think that the connection is important is because sometimes these problems crop up. So what if a laptop is not available? Okay, and this is often a problem, for example, if a teacher is sick and you've got a CRT and the CRT doesn't have a laptop, so the CRT is like supposed to be teaching a lesson without a laptop, right? If they don't have a laptop, they can still use the visualizer that is connected via HDMI, no problem, right? But if they need to have a visualizer that connects via USB to a computer, suddenly you can't use it anymore. Okay, so not only do they not have a laptop, but they also can't use the visualizer. Okay, another problem that can crop up is the internet stops working. You know, that's happened at my school plenty of times where the internet stops working, everyone freaks out, everyone starts like tethering to a hotspot. If the internet stops working, it means that wireless connections don't work. So that means that if your visualizer is connected to the TV via HDMI, happy days, it's still going to keep working. If it's connected wirelessly to the computer or to the screen, then it's not going to work. So that wireless connection won't work. The USB will continue working. That wireless connection will stop working. That HDMI connection will keep working, right? So you should think through this scenario when you're purchasing a visualizer. If the internet stops working, well, will I be able to use the visualizer? So the big idea here, wireless connections are cleaner. Lots of people love wireless connections and they are sort of nice. But direct connections, they're faster and they're more reliable. So maybe it doesn't look so nice, but it is more reliable. Some other features to look for when you're buying a visualizer is whether they have a zoom or not. So your cheaper visualizers may not have a zoom. You might have to physically like bend the camera down closer to the thing where instead of just pressing a button. Whether it focuses is an important thing, right? If you have no control over the focus and it's just a blur, and then you're like, well, I guess it's just a blurry image, then that could be a problem too. So you probably want to focus. Now, this is like not so common, but some visualizers have a freeze option, which can be really helpful. One of the ways you can use a freeze feature is if you're sharing student work, right? You stick the student work underneath the document camera, you freeze the image, and then you can give the work back to the student, but you can continue using the work that you've frozen. Okay, so that's one of the ways you can use the freeze option. Okay, so I talked about the different ranges. So the lower range, you get visualizers that are USB connected. In the mid-range, you start seeing visualizers that have an HDMI connection, which I recommend. I mean, you can make do with just a USB connection, but as I said, there are scenarios where the USB connection might not work. You start to see buttons for zoom and focus and freeze in the mid-range as well. In the higher range, you get the HDMI connection. You also start seeing some wireless options. I've never used a wireless option, but if someone wants to buy me a wireless visualizer, yeah, I won't say no. And then you also see those buttons for zoom, focus, and freeze as well. So just some key considerations, right? I think any document camera or visualizer is going to be a good investment, but maybe you want to spend a little bit more money. So my final thought is that document cameras, and I hope this is obvious to you by now, they have everyday applications for teachers to enhance their instruction. I've got a QR code here. So if you wanted access to the presentation slides, then you can do that just by scanning this with your phone. Some of the engagement icons, so when I showed you some slides and they had like a little circular icon in the top right corner, you can use those icons, just download them from the site. Also some further reading. I think the data from PISA around technology is like very, very interesting. So if you want to do any further reading, again, just go to the resources there. And that's the end of my presentation. I hope this has been really, really helpful to you.
Thanks so much for sharing your experience with us, Brad. I know that I've been writing notes as we've been chatting and as you've been presenting, so I really appreciate you taking the time to talk through things, particularly some of those elements that we don't often get talked about, like where do I put this in my room? How do I set it up? If I'm going to purchase a visualizer, so what should I be looking for? They're all things that perhaps you don't find quite as easily. So it's great to hear from you on that. So thanks so much. I think I speak for all of us in saying that we learn a lot today. Just a general announcement from us, we'll make a recording of this session available. So if you missed the QR code or you want to look back at some of the elements of Brad's presentation today or share it with a colleague, you're more than welcome to. We'll put it up on the Ochre YouTube channel, and also all those who registered will send a link to the recording, so you'll have the opportunity to look back at it again. And thank you again for making time on this Monday night to learn from Brad and share some of your experiences with one another. We know it's tricky at the end of a school day, so thank you very much. We really appreciate it.